The chevrons locked with mechanical precision, each engagement echoing through the gate room on Chulak like the tolling of a death knell. Bruce Wayne had experienced dimensional anomalies before: phantom zone breaches, boom tube accidents, even the occasional multiverse incursion courtesy of whatever cosmic crisis was threatening reality that week. But watching the event horizon stabilize into that impossible vertical pool of shimmering energy while Jaffa warriors leveled staff weapons at his position was definitively new territory. He'd been consulting with SG-1 at Stargate Command. Wayne Enterprises had detected unusual energy signatures that matched SGC's classified gate activations, prompting General Hammond to reluctantly accept his investigation. The briefing had barely begun when the gate activated without authorization. Incoming wormhole. Unscheduled off-world activation. The iris hadn't closed in time. Something had pulled him through, his utility belt the only equipment that made the journey, as the wormhole's gravitational field seized him and hurled him across the galaxy in seconds that felt like falling through liquid starlight. Now he stood in red-orange sand beneath two suns, surrounded by warriors in ornate armor bearing the mark of a serpent god, and the Stargate behind him was already shutting down with a sound like reality sealing itself. The lead Jaffa, head shaved, golden tattoo marking his forehead, staff weapon charged and humming, stepped forward with the confidence of a soldier who'd killed 1,000 enemies. "Identify yourself, stranger," the Jaffa commanded in accented English. "You bear no mark of Apophis, no sigil of any system lord. You dare step through the Chapai unauthorized?" Bruce assessed the tactical situation in the 3 seconds before responding. 12 hostiles in a semicircle, weapons hot. Staff weapons, energy discharge, roughly equivalent to military-grade plasma. No cover within immediate range except scattered ruins of what looked like ancient stone columns. The gate behind him inactive, and he had no way to dial home without the device he'd glimpsed, some kind of control panel 30 meters to his left, currently behind enemy lines. His cape and cowl would mean nothing to these warriors. The Batman was urban legend made flesh in Gotham. Here, he was just another lost traveler. But he'd built empires from nothing before. "I'm not your enemy," Bruce said, hands visible but not raised in surrender. "I was brought here against my will. That gate activated without my control. The Chapai does not activate without purpose," another voice said, older and weighted with authority. A Jaffa emerged from the shadows of a nearby structure, elderly by warrior standards, his face lined with scars and decades of combat, staff weapon held with the casual competence of a master. "The gods do not make mistakes. Your gods are parasites wearing human hosts," Bruce said flatly, reading the situation from their body language and equipment. These weren't the polished warriors of a capital world. Their armor bore repairs, their weapons showed field maintenance rather than armory precision. Rebels or outcasts. "I've seen the intelligence reports. The Goa'uld are not divine. They're slavers with stolen technology." The younger Jaffa's eyes widened in shock, then fury. "Blasphemy!" Staff weapon rising to firing position. "Hold, Keltar," the elder commanded, and the weapon lowered fractionally. The old warrior stepped closer, studying Bruce with eyes that had seen too many battles and buried too many warriors. "You speak as one who knows the truth. You speak as the Tauri speak." His gaze sharpened. "You come from Earth." "I was with SG-1 when the gate activated," Bruce confirmed, calculating angles. "These weren't loyal System Lord troops." The way they reacted to his words about the Goa'uld, shock, but not rejection. Seeds of doubt already planted. "General Hammond's people. You know them. The warrior TLC has spoken of others among the Tauri who resist the Goa'uld," the elder said slowly. "But he spoke only of soldiers and scholars. You are neither." "I'm a detective," Bruce said, which was true enough. "And I've spent my life fighting those who use fear and false divinity to control others. Your system lords are no different than the criminals I've faced. They just operate on a larger scale." The elder Jaffa lowered his staff weapon completely, and the others followed his lead with practiced discipline. I am Bratak of Chulak, once first prime of Apophis. These are brothers of the Jaffa Rebellion. He gestured to the ruins around them, what Bruce now recognized as a hidden encampment, defensive positions carefully constructed within ancient structures. We are those who have learned the truth and fight for freedom from false gods. If you are indeed Tauri, and speak truth about the Goa'uld, then perhaps the Chappai brought you here for purpose after all. Bruce's eyes narrowed behind his cowl. No, he realized, no cowl. Just his face. Just Bruce Wayne transported across the galaxy with nothing but his mind, his skills, and whatever tools remained in his belt. But he'd toppled crime families with less. He'd infiltrated the Court of Owls. He'd brought Gotham back from the edge of chaos more times than he could count. A galaxy-spanning slave empire? That was just a larger city. And every city had pressure points. Then we should talk, Bruce said. Because I've spent 20 years learning how to dismantle organizations built on fear. And from what I understand, you're going to need every advantage you can get. Bratak's weathered face creased into something that might have been a smile. Come. TLC should hear your words. The rebellion is fractured, our victories small and scattered. If the Tauri send us a strategist, the gods may finally have reason to fear. As the Jaffa rebels led him deeper into their camp, past warriors maintaining equipment and tending to wounded comrades, Bruce cataloged everything. Troop strength, supply status, morale indicators, tactical positioning. This wasn't Gotham, and these weren't the Robins or the extended Bat family. But rebellion was rebellion, and insurgency was his specialty. The Goa'uld had enslaved this galaxy for millennia through technology and mythology. Batman had taken down gods before. He'd beaten Darkseid. He'd outmaneuvered Ras Al Ghul. He'd stood against the Justice League itself, when necessary. False gods wearing snakes? They were about to learn why Gotham's criminals whispered his name in the dark. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. Indeed. The twin sons of Chulak beat down on red sand, and somewhere in the shadows of ruined temples, a rebellion was about to gain its most dangerous weapon, a man who'd turned fear into an art form and strategy into science. The Goa'uld had ruled through terror for thousands of years. They were about to face someone who'd perfected it. The rebel encampment sprawled through ruins that predated the Goa'uld presence on Chulak by centuries. Ancient structures, Bratak explained as they walked, built by the first humans seated on this world before the false gods claimed dominion. Bruce cataloged defensive positions with practiced efficiency, sight lines covered by warriors and alcoves, supply caches hidden beneath collapsed archways, weapons maintenance stations positioned for quick dispersal if the camp was compromised. Guerrilla warfare fundamentals, executed with military precision but hampered by inadequate resources. They needed better coordination, better intelligence networks, better psychological operations to undermine enemy morale while building their own. They needed what he'd spent 2 decades building in Gotham. Bratak led him to a central structure where firelight flickered against stone walls covered in carved symbols. Not gold hieroglyphs, Bruce noted, but something older. A Jaffa warrior stood beside a crude tactical map scratched into a stone table, marking positions with colored stones. The warrior turned at their approach, and Bruce recognized the gold emblem on his forehead from SGC intelligence files, the mark of Apophis, worn now as a badge of rebellion rather than servitude. TLC, Bratak said. The Chappai has delivered a gift. A Tauri strategist. TLC's gaze swept over Bruce with the assessment of a career soldier evaluating a potential asset or threat. 6'4", 220, combat reflexes evident in the way he held his staff weapon, not pointed at Bruce, but ready to transition to firing position in under a second if necessary. Former first prime of a system lord. The intelligence report said he'd walked away from ultimate power to join SG-1, driven by the realization that his gods were false and his people deserved freedom. I am TLC of Chulak, the warrior said, his voice carrying the formal cadence of someone who'd spent decades enforcing a god's will. Master Bratak speaks truly. You are Tauri. But you are not of the SGC. I would have been informed of your assignment to our cause. I wasn't assigned, Bruce said. Gate malfunctioned during a consultation at Stargate Command. I was pulled through before the iris could close. He moved to the tactical map, studying the stone markers. Red stones clustered around what appeared to be major settlements. Blue stones scattered across dozens of positions. But I've worked insurgencies before. What am I looking at? TLC's eyebrow rose fractionally, the closest thing to surprise Bruce had seen from him. You recognize tactical deployment patterns. I've spent 20 years fighting organized crime, terrorist cells, and ideological extremists in an urban environment, Bruce said, identifying the pattern immediately. Your red stones are System Lord strongholds. Hot-tack landing sites, garrison positions, strategic resources. Blue stones are rebel cells. He pointed to the scattered positioning. You're fragmented. Each cell operating independently, striking targets of opportunity without coordination. Effective for survival, but you'll never win a war this way. Bratak's eyes narrowed with interest. You perceive much from simple stones, detective. It's what I do. Bruce studied the map more closely, his mind already working through the strategic problems. How many cells are we talking about? What's your total force strength across all positions? Approximately 2,000 Jaffa have openly declared for the rebellion across 12 worlds. TLC said. Many more sympathize but cannot act without condemning their families to death. The system lords maintain hostage populations on every world. Wives, children, elders. All held in bondage to ensure loyalty from warrior castes. Bruce's jaw tightened. Hostage situations scaled to planetary populations. The kind of leverage that made tactical planning a nightmare because every strike risked reprisal against civilians. He'd faced similar situations in Gotham, mob bosses threatening families, terrorists with deadman switches, the Joker's endless hostage games. But never at this scale. What's your command structure? Bruce asked. Who coordinates operations between cells? There is no coordination, TLC admitted, and Bruce heard frustration beneath the stoic delivery. Master Bratak and I travel between cells, sharing intelligence and providing tactical guidance. But communication is limited to face-to-face contact through the Chapai. The Goa'uld monitor all long-range transmissions. Any electronic coordination would be detected and crushed. So you're fighting blind, Bruce said. Each cell strikes when opportunity presents, but you can't coordinate simultaneous operations. You can't exploit System Lord weaknesses across multiple fronts. You can't force them to divide their forces responding to threats. He looked up from the map. You're annoying them, not threatening them. Bratak's scarred face creased into a grim smile. You speak harsh truth, Tauri. But we lack the resources for more. The System Lords command fleets of hot-tack motherships, armies numbering hundreds of thousands, weapons that can reduce cities to ash from orbit. We have staff weapons, determination, and the knowledge that our gods are false. He gestured to the scattered blue stones. How does one coordinate rebellion across a galaxy when the enemy controls the very stars between worlds? Bruce studied the map silently, his mind racing through possibilities. In Gotham, he built an intelligence network that spanned the city, informants, surveillance systems, the Bat computer coordinating data from thousands of sources. He'd coordinated the Bat family across multiple simultaneous operations using encrypted communications and dead drops. He'd infiltrated organizations from the inside, turning their own information networks against them. The principles didn't change just because the battlefield expanded from city blocks to star systems. You said the Goa'uld monitor electronic transmissions, Bruce said slowly. What about low-tech communication? Dead drops at specific gate addresses? Coded messages left at predetermined locations that cells check on rotation schedules? TLC tilted his head, considering. The Chapai allows travel to thousands of worlds. Many are uninhabited, monitored only by automated Goa'uld systems. In theory, such locations could serve as message relays. Not theory. Standard tradecraft for insurgent cells operating under surveillance. Bruce pulled a small notebook from his utility belt, one of the few items that had made the journey through the gate, and began sketching. You establish a network of dead-drop worlds. Each cell knows their schedule, checks specific locations at predetermined intervals. Messages left in physical form, coded using patterns only the Rebellion understands. No electronic signatures, nothing for the Goa'uld to intercept. It would be slow, Bratak observed. Days or weeks between message delivery and receipt. But secure, Bruce countered. And it gives you coordination capability you don't currently have. You can plan multi-cell operations, share intelligence about system lord movements, warn each other about compromised positions. He marked positions on his sketch. Eventually, you build towards simultaneous strikes across multiple worlds. Force the Goa'uld to respond to threats they can't predict or contain. You would teach us the ways of Tauri insurgency, Tilsi said, and something shifted in his expression. Not quite hope, but perhaps the recognition of possibility where none had existed before. The tactics that allowed your people to throw off the tyranny of false gods and build free civilization. Bruce met his gaze. Earth never faced occupation by parasitic aliens with orbital bombardment capability. But we've fought plenty of wars against overwhelming force. Insurgencies win by making occupation too costly to maintain, by undermining the occupier's legitimacy, by building alternative power structures that make the old regime irrelevant. He looked back at the map. Your system lords maintain control through mythology and fear. They've convinced entire populations that they're gods, that resistance is impossible, that slavery is the natural order. You would destroy their mythology, Bratak said softly. As the warrior Tilsi began when he joined the Tauri. But how does one kill a god in the minds of billions who have worshipped for millennia? The same way you eat an elephant, Bruce said. One bite at a time. You don't start by attacking their main power bases. You start by making them look fallible. Weak. Human. His finger traced patterns across the map, already identifying targets. Small victories that spread as stories. Garrison commanders humiliated. Supply convoys intercepted. False gods forced to flee from mere Jaffa warriors. Every story chips away at the mythology. Every victory proves the gods can bleed. Psychological warfare, Tilsi observed. SG-1 employs similar tactics, though Colonel O'Neill would describe them more crudely. It's more than tactics. It's systematic deconstruction of the enemy's ideological foundation. Bruce's mind was fully engaged now, seeing the strategic landscape with the same clarity he'd analyzed Gotham's underworld. But it requires coordination, intelligence, and most importantly, it requires symbols. The rebellion needs an identity beyond scattered cells. Something that unifies the resistance and terrifies the Goa'uld. Bradak's smile widened. You speak of becoming legend, Tauri. Of forging symbol from shadow. He exchanged a glance with Tilsi. Perhaps the Chapai delivered you to us for greater purpose than accident. The Jaffa have fought as scattered warriors seeking freedom. Perhaps we require something more. Perhaps we require what you would call in your world. Tilsi said, his tone carrying unexpected gravity. A dark night. Bruce didn't smile. Didn't acknowledge the implicit recognition. In Gotham, Batman was symbol and weapon forged from tragedy and training. Here, surrounded by warriors fighting to free their people from millennia of slavery, he was just a man with skills and determination. But he'd built legends from less before. And the Goa'uld were about to learn that mythology cuts both ways. 3 days of reconnaissance taught Bruce more about the Goa'uld occupation than a month of SGC intelligence briefings could have conveyed. Bratak arranged for him to observe a supply convoy arriving at a nearby Jaffa settlement, close enough to study logistics, far enough to avoid detection. Bruce lay prone on a ridge overlooking the valley, watching Hotak death gliders escort cargo vessels that landed with repulsor technology centuries beyond Earth's current capabilities. The technology disparity was staggering. But technology created dependencies, and dependencies created vulnerabilities. The supplies arrive every 10 days. Hotak whispered beside him, the old warrior barely disturbing the red sand despite his size. Weapons, armor, provisions for the garrison. The convoys follow predictable routes, predictable schedules. The Goa'uld believe their air superiority makes ground interdiction impossible. They're right, if you fight them directly, Bruce said, studying the landing zone through the binoculars he'd improvised from Jaffa optical equipment. 6 death gliders maintaining aerial patrol. 40 Jaffa warriors securing the perimeter. 4 cargo vessels offloading under the supervision of what his briefings identified as a minor Goa'uld underlord, host eyes glowing with that characteristic golden light, voice modulated with that artificial resonance they used to project divine authority. Classic colonial occupation logistics. Centralized supply chains. Hierarchical command structures. The same weaknesses that had plagued every empire in human history, just operating across star systems instead of continents. You perceive weakness in their strength, Hotak observed. I perceive patterns. Bruce tracked the movement of supplies from cargo vessels to ground transport, large hovering sleds that would distribute resources to smaller outposts. They're efficient, but efficiency means routine. Routine means predictability. How many settlements depend on this supply hub? 14 garrison positions within this region of Chulak. Teal'c's voice came from Bruce's other side. The younger Jaffa had approached without sound, appearing from concealment like a ghost. Approximately 600 warriors, plus support personnel and enslaved populations. The Goa'uld Underlord Kelnor commands this territory in the name of the System Lord Yu. Bruce filed that information away. System Lord Yu. The intelligence briefing said he was among the eldest Goa'uld, modeling himself after the Chinese god. More honorable than most, which meant potentially more predictable. But honor in a parasitic alien wearing a human host was relative at best. Kelnor takes personal oversight of supply distribution? Bruce asked. The Goa'uld trust no one fully, Teal'c said. Even their Jaffa servants are monitored constantly for signs of disloyalty. Kelnor ensures each garrison commander personally acknowledges receipt of supplies, confirms loyalty to you, and reports any suspicion of rebellion in their ranks. So he gathers intelligence while distributing resources. Bruce watched the Underlord move among the cargo vessels, that golden glow marking him as something other than human. Something that deserved fear and worship in the eyes of those who didn't know better. Every 10 days you have 14 garrison commanders in one location, personally acknowledging loyalty to their god. An opportunity, Hotak said slowly. But striking at Goa'uld directly invites catastrophic reprisal. When the System Lord Haruyuar's Underlord was assassinated by rebels on Toraner, Haruyuar orbital bombarded the entire settlement. 3,000 Jaffa and enslaved humans died to punish 50 rebels. Then you don't kill him, Bruce said. You humiliate him. You make him look weak, fallible, human. You strike at the mythology, not just the man. He lowered the binoculars, mind already working through the tactical problem. What do the garrison commanders believe happens if they fail to acknowledge loyalty? Death, Teal'c said simply. The Goa'uld demonstrate their power through public execution. Staff weapon to the head, or worse, the ribbon device. He touched his forehead unconsciously, and Bruce noted the gesture. Personal experience with Goa'uld torture. The Karakesh is designed to cause maximum pain while leaving the victim alive for extended suffering. It sends a message to all who witness. Fear and spectacle, Bruce muttered. Same control mechanisms as organized crime. The Goa'uld are just mob bosses with better technology and worse fashion sense. He studied the landing zone again, this time analyzing not the defenses but the performance. Because that's what this was, theater designed to reinforce hierarchy. When does the next supply distribution occur? 7 days, Hotak said. But I caution against rash action, Detective. We have struck at convoys before. The Goa'uld simply increase security, execute suspected collaborators, and continue operations with minimal disruption. That's because you've been treating this as a military problem, Bruce said. Hit the convoy, steal supplies, disappear into the desert. Tactically sound, but strategically limited. You're thinking like warriors fighting a superior force. He met Bratak's eyes. I'm thinking like a detective investigating a crime syndicate. And the first rule of taking down organized crime is you don't just hit their operations, you make them paranoid. You turn their own security measures against them. You make them suspect everyone, trust no one, see betrayal in every shadow. TLC's expression shifted slightly. You would sow discord among the Goa'uld and their Jaffa servants. I would exploit the inherent instability of any power structure built on fear and false divinity. Bruce pulled out his notebook, sketching the supply distribution layout from memory. The Goa'uld maintain control by convincing their Jaffa that they're gods. Omniscient, omnipotent, untouchable. But what happens when a Goa'uld's intelligence network fails? When his security is breached in ways that suggest inside information? When garrison commanders start wondering if their peers are rebel sympathizers? The Goa'uld would suspect betrayal, Bratak said, understanding dawning in his scarred features. Would interrogate his commanders. Perhaps execute those he deemed untrustworthy. And in doing so, create actual rebels from Jaffa who were loyal before being accused. Bruce finished. It's a classic destabilization technique. The KGB used it against dissidents, the Stasi against West German intelligence. Every authoritarian regime eventually eats itself through paranoia. He continued sketching. But it requires precision. We need intelligence on Kelnor's security procedures, his communication protocols with garrison commanders, his personal routines. Such intelligence is difficult to acquire, TLC said. The Goa'uld guard their operations zealously. Then we start with what we can observe and extrapolate patterns. Bruce closed the notebook. I've built profiles on metahumans with reality-warping powers, interdimensional demons, and a clown who somehow always stays one step ahead of Arkham's best psychiatrists. A parasitic alien playing God? That's just pattern recognition with different variables. He spent the next 3 days doing what he did best, investigating. Bratak and TLC arranged for him to observe 2 more supply convoys at different locations, interview Jaffa rebels who'd served in U.S. forces, and study captured Goa'uld equipment for technological vulnerabilities. Bruce catalogued everything in his notebook: arrival times, security rotations, command hierarchies, communication patterns, even the body language of Jaffa warriors interacting with their Goa'uld masters. Pattern recognition was his superpower, if you could call it that. Where others saw random events, he saw connections. Where others saw strength, he saw the weaknesses strength created. The Goa'uld's greatest vulnerability was their own arrogance. They'd ruled for millennia through overwhelming technological superiority and cultivated mythology. They didn't expect sophisticated counterintelligence because they didn't believe primitives capable of it. They didn't anticipate psychological operations because they thought fear alone sufficient for control. They'd never faced an opponent who'd spent 20 years turning Gotham's criminal underworld against itself through precisely calculated interventions. On the evening of the 6th day, Bruce gathered TLC, Bratak, and the rebel cell leaders in the ancient structure that served as their command post. He'd spent the afternoon preparing a presentation using materials scavenged from the rebel camp, marked stones for tactical positions, sketched diagrams on salvaged cloth, a timeline carved into a flat piece of stone. Tomorrow, Kelnor distributes supplies to 14 garrison commanders. Bruce began, addressing the assembled Jaffa warriors with the same tone he used briefing the Justice League. We're going to be there. But we're not hitting the convoy, and we're not engaging in direct combat. We're going to do something the Goa'uld won't expect and can't defend against. He placed markers on his improvised tactical display. We're going to make Kelnor's security chief look incompetent, his intelligence network look compromised, and his garrison commanders look like potential rebels. And we're going to do it without firing a single shot. The Jaffa exchanged skeptical glances. These were warriors trained for millennia in direct combat, in the glory of battle and the honor of facing enemies with staff weapons drawn. What Bruce proposed was antithetical to everything their culture valued. "Explain," Broddak commanded, though his eyes gleamed with interest. Bruce smiled, not the public Bruce Wayne smile, but the thin, dangerous expression that meant Batman had found his prey's weakness. "Gladly. Let me tell you about dead drops, false flags, and how to make a god look very, very human." The desert night on Chulak was cold enough that Bruce's breath misted in the air, but the chill kept him sharp. He moved through the shadows of the supply depot's outer perimeter with TLC 3 meters to his left, both of them invisible against the red stone formations that ringed the valley. The twin moons provided just enough light to navigate by, not enough to expose their approach. 20 years of rooftop work in Gotham had taught Bruce to move in darkness like it was a second skin. TLC moved with different grace, not the urban efficiency of a vigilante, but the patient stalking of a warrior who'd spent decades hunting enemies across hostile terrain. Different methodologies, same result. They reached the first checkpoint without triggering a single alarm. "The sensor array is positioned as you predicted," TLC whispered, gesturing to a barely visible shimmer in the air 15 meters ahead. "Goa'uld motion detection technology. Any disturbance will alert the garrison." "Then we don't disturb it," Bruce said, studying the sensor pattern. He'd spent 2 days analyzing captured Goa'uld surveillance equipment, learning its operational parameters through the same methodical reverse engineering he applied to Lex Luthor's security systems or Riddler's elaborate death traps. Every technology had blind spots. You just had to find them. The sensors are calibrated for human-sized targets at ground level. They're not watching for aerial approach or subsurface infiltration. "We cannot fly," TLC observed dryly. "And digging beneath would take days." Bruce pulled a compact grappling gun from his utility belt, one of the few pieces of equipment that had survived the gate transit intact. "We don't need to fly. We just need altitude." He aimed at an outcropping 20 meters up the cliff face, the line shooting out with a pneumatic hiss barely louder than breathing. "The sensors sweep horizontally. If we climb above their detection plane and traverse the cliff face, we bypass the entire perimeter." TLC's eyebrow rose fractionally. "Your technology is primitive compared to Goa'uld capabilities, yet you employ it with considerable innovation." "I work with what I have," Bruce said, testing the line's anchoring. "Solid. In Gotham, I'm usually outgunned. Metahumans with super strength, criminals with Wayne tech they've stolen and modified, assassins from the League trained by a centuries-old man. You learn to think asymmetrically or you don't survive." He began climbing, hand over hand, boots finding purchase on the rock face. The Goa'uld have technological superiority. But they've had it so long they've forgotten how to think like insurgents. They scaled the cliff in silence, traversing above the sensor grid until they could rappel down inside the perimeter. The supply depots sprawled below them, cargo containers stacked in organized rows, death gliders parked in defensive formations, Jaffa sentries patrolling on predictable rotations Bruce had memorized from 3 days of observation. The Underlord Kelnor's command tent occupied the depot's center, marked by the golden banners of System Lord U and guarded by his personal elite. "The security protocols change shift in 4 minutes, TLC said, consulting a chronometer. "The overlap provides 17 seconds when sections of the depot are unwatched. Then we move in 4 minutes." Bruce studied the layout one final time, confirming his mental map matched reality. "You're certain about the garrison commander's arrival schedule?" "They will arrive at dawn, as always. Kelnor summons them personally to demonstrate his authority and their subservience. It is ritual. The Goa'uld are slaves to their own traditions." "Good. Traditions are predictable." Bruce checked his equipment, a carefully selected collection of items scavenged from the rebel camp and modified for tonight's operation. Not his usual loadout, but battlefield improvisation was what separated adequate operatives from exceptional ones. Remember, we're not here to steal supplies or gather intelligence. We're here to plant questions. To make Kelnor wonder who's feeding information to the rebels. To make him paranoid. The sentries changed shift with military precision. In the 17-second gap, Bruce and TLC descended into the depot like shadows given form. They moved between cargo containers, timing their advance to coincide with patrol rotations, staying in the sensor-blind spots Bruce had identified. He'd pulled similar infiltrations 100 times in Gotham, sneaking into mob warehouses, Arkham's maximum security wings, even the Watchtower once when he needed to verify a suspicion about League security protocols. This was just a different set of guards in a different location. The principles didn't change. Their first target was a communications array positioned between two cargo stacks. Bruce pulled a small device from his belt, Goa'uld technology cannibalized from captured equipment, and reprogrammed by one of the rebel cell's technical specialists under his guidance. It wouldn't hack the system, nothing so detectable. It would simply record the next transmission and create a delayed echo, replaying fragments of conversation hours after the original broadcast. The kind of glitch that suggested equipment malfunction or sophisticated jamming. The kind of anomaly that made security chiefs nervous and Goa'uld paranoid. Device planted, Bruce whispered as the recorder attached magnetically to the array's housing, invisible unless someone knew exactly where to look. Next target. They moved deeper into the depot, avoiding two patrol groups and a hovering surveillance drone through sheer patience and timing. The second objective was a supply manifest data terminal near Kelnor's command tent. TLC kept watch while Bruce worked, his fingers moving across the Goa'uld interface with practiced efficiency. He'd spent 2 days learning their symbolic language from rebel translators, cross-referencing it with ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics and his own linguistic training. He didn't need to read every symbol. Just enough to access the supply distribution records and make a single, subtle alteration. "What are you changing?" TLC asked, his staff weapon ready to stun any approaching guards. "Delivery quantities for garrison position 7. Bruce said, his voice barely audible. "I'm increasing their allocated Naquata power cells by 30%. His fingers danced across the interface, changing numbers with surgical precision. On the manifest, it'll look like Garrison 7 was authorized for additional resources. But the physical delivery won't match. When the commander arrives tomorrow and sees the discrepancy, he'll either stay silent, making him look guilty of hoarding, or report it, making him look incompetent for not noticing the error earlier. And Kelnor will suspect the commander of either treason or stupidity," TLC said, understanding gleaming in his eyes. "Or worse, he will suspect his own logistics officers of falsifying records." "Exactly. But that's just the setup." Bruce finished the alteration, covering his tracks through the same digital misdirection techniques he used erasing evidence of Batman's activities from GCPD databases. "The Garrison 7 commander has been loyal to you for 40 years according to your intelligence. When Kelnor interrogates him about a discrepancy that doesn't make sense, the commander will be genuinely confused. His confusion will look like deception. Kelnor will push harder. The commander will protest innocence." Classic interrogation spiral. "You create conflict from nothing," TLC observed. "Sows suspicion where none should exist. I create the appearance of patterns that force the enemy to see conspiracies." Bruce closed the terminal interface, leaving no trace of his access. "The human mind is wired to find patterns even where none exist. Kelnor's security training makes him paranoid by necessity. Give a paranoid mind just enough anomalies, and it'll construct elaborate theories about infiltration and betrayal." He gestured toward the command tent. "One more modification, then we extract." The third target was the riskiest, a secure storage unit near Kelnor's personal quarters where Garrison Commander's loyalty reports were stored. Physical documents, not digital, because the Goa'uld trusted paper over potentially hackable systems for their most sensitive intelligence. Bruce had faced similar security challenges penetrating League of Assassins strongholds and checkmate facilities. Lockpicking had been one of the first skills he'd mastered as a teenager in his drive to understand criminal methodology. Goa'uld locks operated on different principles than Earth technology, but the fundamental concepts remained constant: mechanisms designed to prevent unauthorized access, exploitable through understanding their construction and application of appropriate force at vulnerable points. 3 minutes of careful manipulation with tools improvised from Jaffa maintenance equipment, and the storage unit opened with a soft click that sounded deafening in the desert silence. Inside rolled scrolls organized by garrison designation. Bruce selected the loyalty report for Garrison 12, a mid-tier outpost with an unremarkable commander who had served competently but without distinction for decades. He unrolled the scroll carefully, studying the Goa'uld script, then pulled a small container of ink from his belt. "What are you writing?" TLC asked, his head on constant swivel watching for patrols. "A single sentence, added to the end of the loyalty report in script that matches the original author's style." Bruce's hand moved with the precision of someone who'd forged documents for undercover operations before. Roughly translated, Commander expresses private concerns about efficiency of current supply distribution. Recommends review of protocols. Then I'm signing it with the notation mark of Kelnor's security chief. TLC's eyes widened slightly. "You implicate the security chief in questioning Kelnor's logistics management, while simultaneously making the Garrison 12 commander look like a potential reformer or critic." Bruce carefully re-rolled the scroll, positioning it exactly as he'd found it. "When Kelnor reviews loyalty reports, which intelligence says he does personally before each supply distribution, he'll see his own security chief raising questions about his competence. He'll confront the security chief, who will deny writing the addition. The security chief will investigate, discover no evidence of his own documentation, and conclude either he's losing his memory or someone forged his notation mark." Bruce sealed the storage unit. Either way, trust between Kelnor and his security apparatus degrades. "You wage war through confusion and distrust," TLC said quietly. "This is not the way of Jaffa warriors. No. It's the way of someone who's fought enemies he couldn't beat through direct force." Bruce led them back through the depot, retracing their infiltration route with the same meticulous timing. "The Joker taught me that chaos is a weapon. Ra's al Ghul taught me that ideology is a vulnerability. Bane taught me that breaking someone psychologically is more effective than breaking their body." They reached the perimeter cliff. "The Goa'uld think they're invulnerable because they have superior technology and enslaved armies. But every authoritarian system has the same weakness. It requires trust between the dictator and his enforcers. Destroy that trust, and the system collapses from within." They climbed back over the sensor grid, rappelled down the outer cliff face, and disappeared into the desert as the first light of dawn touched the horizon. Behind them, the supply depot remained undisturbed, no alarms triggered, no guards alerted. But in several hours, when garrison commanders arrived and Kelnor began his ritual distribution of resources, 3 small anomalies would surface. 3 tiny cracks in the appearance of perfect control. And like any good detective knew, you didn't need a sledgehammer to bring down a structure. You just needed to find the cracks and apply pressure until the whole thing came apart. "Will this truly damage the Goa'uld's operations?" TLC asked as they rejoined Bratak and the rebel team at the extraction point. Bruce watched the supply depot in the distance, imagining the confusion that would unfold in a few hours. The accusations, the interrogations, the growing suspicion between Kelnor and his subordinates. "It's a start," he said. "Guerrilla warfare isn't about winning battles. It's about making occupation unsustainable. Making the enemy expend more resources on internal security than external operations. Making them afraid of their own shadows." He turned to Bratak. "The Goa'uld have ruled through fear for millennia. Time to teach them what real fear feels like." The rebel camp's intelligence network operated through runners, Jaffa who could pass as loyal servants traveling between worlds on legitimate business. 3 days after the supply depot operation, a runner arrived from Chulak's southern garrison with news that made Bratak's scarred face split into a rare smile. "Kelnor executed his security chief yesterday," the runner reported, kneeling before the assembled rebel leaders. "Accused him of falsifying loyalty reports and conspiring with rebels." The security chief proclaimed innocence to his final breath, but Kelnor used the ribbon device. Made an example before all 14 garrison commanders. Bruce sat in the corner of the command structure, listening without visible reaction. But internally he catalogued the result. The operation had succeeded beyond initial projections. He'd expected interrogations, perhaps imprisonment. Kelnor had escalated to execution, which meant the paranoia had taken root deeper than anticipated. "The garrison commanders witnessed this?" TLC asked. "All 14. Kelnor declared that disloyalty would be punished without mercy, that he suspected rebel infiltration at the highest levels of his command structure." The runner's voice carried barely suppressed satisfaction. 3 commanders requested immediate transfer to other system lord territories. Kelnor denied all requests, which has caused further unrest. The commanders whisper among themselves that service to you under Kelnor's command has become death sentence regardless of loyalty. "Fear breeding fear," Bruce said quietly. The Goa'uld's own tactics turned inward. Bratak approached, his expression thoughtful. "You engineered this outcome specifically, Detective. The death of Kelnor's security chief, the fracturing of trust between Underlord and garrison commanders. You calculated these results before we ever infiltrated the depot." "I calculated probable outcomes based on psychological profiling," Bruce corrected. "Kelnor exhibited classic authoritarian paranoia in his documented behavior patterns. Leaders who rule through fear eventually become consumed by it. I just accelerated the process." He stood, moving to the tactical map. "But one execution isn't victory. It's an opening. The question is whether we exploit it or let the momentum dissipate." "Exploit how?" one of the rebel cell leaders asked. A Jaffa named Shani Usi who commanded 15 warriors and had served in U's forces before defecting. "Kelnor will increase security measures. The depot will become fortress, which makes it expensive to maintain and ties down resources," Bruce said. "But you're right that we can't hit the same target the same way twice. Kelnor's paranoid, not stupid. He'll adapt." He studied the map, specifically the scattered blue stones representing rebel positions. "We need to expand operations. Hit multiple targets using different methodologies. Keep the Goa'uld responding to threats they can't predict or categorize. We lack the coordination," TLC said. "The dead drop communication network you proposed would take weeks to establish across multiple worlds. Then we start with what we can coordinate directly." Bruce marked several positions on the map. "How many cells can you contact within the next 5 days through direct gate travel?" Bratak calculated mentally. 7 cells across 4 worlds. Perhaps 8 if we travel without rest. 8 cells conducting simultaneous operations across 4 worlds, Bruce said. "Different targets, different methods, but coordinated timing. The Goa'uld will see pattern of widespread rebellion but won't be able to predict next strike." He began marking targets. "But we're not hitting military installations or supply depots this time. We're hitting something the Goa'uld can't defend with superior firepower." "What target cannot be defended?" Shani Usi asked skeptically. Bruce met her eyes. "Their mythology." Over the next 4 days, Bruce and TLC traveled through the Stargate to rebel cells on 4 different worlds, carrying Bruce's operational plan like a contagion. At each cell, he laid out the same strategic framework: identify local populations still enslaved by Goa'uld mythology, select targets that would demonstrate false gods' vulnerability, execute operations designed for maximum psychological impact with minimum rebel casualties. On the world of Nazia, he taught a rebel cell how to intercept and modify a Goa'uld communication broadcast, replacing the Underlord's divine pronouncements with recordings of the same Underlord screaming in pain during what appeared to be interrogation. The rebels didn't have footage of actual torture, but Bruce had learned sound editing techniques during his training with intelligence agencies, and Goa'uld vocal resonance could be manipulated to sound authentically distressed with the right audio engineering. On Sahal, he showed rebels how to sabotage a ceremonial barge scheduled to carry a minor Goa'uld through enslaved villages. Not with explosives, too crude, too easily blamed on random equipment failure. Instead, they reprogrammed the barge's navigational systems to make it circle aimlessly in the desert, while broadcasting a repeating message in the Goa'uld's own voice. "I am lost. I cannot find my way. Help me." A god who couldn't navigate his own territory. A divine being begging primitive humans for assistance. The symbolism would spread faster than any military victory. On Chulak itself, Bratak's cell prepared the most ambitious operation. Infiltrating a temple where Jaffa brought their sick and dying to pray for divine healing. The Goa'uld allowed this practice because it reinforced their godhood while costing them nothing. The sick either recovered naturally or died, and both outcomes could be attributed to divine will. Bruce planned to change that equation. "The temple's medical facility is primitive by Earth standards," he explained to the assembled rebels. "But it has basic surgical equipment and pharmaceutical supplies. The Goa'uld use it occasionally when they want to demonstrate mercy. They heal someone using their healing device, the locals witness a miracle, faith is reinforced. We cannot heal with Goa'uld technology," Shanayusi said. "The healing device requires Naquata in the bloodstream. None among the rebels possess symbiotes any longer. We don't need Goa'uld technology. We need basic medicine and knowledge of human anatomy." Bruce pulled out sketches he'd made, anatomical diagrams, surgical procedures, pharmaceutical compounds. "I've performed field medicine in Gotham when my injuries were too severe for Alfred to handle alone. I've studied trauma surgery, emergency medical response, even some techniques from metahuman physiology research." He pointed to the temple layout. "We infiltrate the medical facility during the night, treat the sickest patients using conventional medicine, then leave before dawn. No divine intervention. No staff weapons or ribbon devices. Just humans helping humans." Teal'c's expression showed understanding. "When the patients recover without Goa'uld intervention, it demonstrates that divine healing is unnecessary. That humans can save themselves." "Exactly. The Goa'uld maintain control partly through making their subjects dependent. Dependent on symbiotes to survive past youth, dependent on sarcophagi for extended life, dependent on healing devices for recovery from injury." Bruce's voice carried intensity born of personal conviction. "Break the dependency, and you break the control. Show people they can heal their own sick, feed their own families, defend their own villages, and suddenly the gods become irrelevant." But the operation required skills the Jaffa rebels didn't possess. Warriors could fight and die with honor, but battlefield medicine and civilian healthcare were specializations they never needed to develop when Goa'uld technology could heal most injuries that didn't immediately kill. Which meant Bruce would have to perform the medical interventions personally. "This is dangerous," Bratak warned. "If you are discovered inside the temple, the Goa'uld will interrogate you. They will learn of Tauri involvement in the rebellion. They may retaliate against Earth itself. They'd have to catch me first," Bruce said. "And I've been infiltrating hostile facilities since I was 23 years old. Arkham Asylum, Blackgate Prison, League of Assassins strongholds. A temple on an occupied world is just another Tuesday." The night of the coordinated operations, Bruce stood in the ancient temple on Chulak wearing stolen Jaffa medical robes, surrounded by the sick and dying who'd come seeking divine intervention that would never arrive. The temple smelled of incense meant to mask the scent of untreated infections, unwashed bodies, and slow death. Gotham's worst slums had prepared him for this. Crime Alley during gang wars, the Narrows during fear toxin outbreaks, the aftermath of Joker's attacks when hospitals overflowed with victims, he'd seen humans suffering in every form. This was just a different context, but the fundamentals remained the same: identify treatable conditions, triage based on severity, maximize survival outcomes with limited resources. He moved through the temple's medical wing like a shadow, examining patients while Jaffa rebel guards kept watch. A child with infected leg wound, bacterial infection, treatable with antibiotics he'd synthesized from local plant compounds using chemistry knowledge from Wayne Enterprises' pharmaceutical division. An elderly man with respiratory distress, fluid in lungs, treatable with diuretic and elevated positioning. A woman with fever and abdominal pain, appendicitis, requiring immediate surgical intervention or she'd be dead by morning. Bruce had performed emergency surgery exactly twice in his life. Once on himself after a warehouse explosion left him with shrapnel embedded near his spine and no way to reach medical help. Once on Robin when a scarecrow encounter went wrong and they were trapped in the Narrows during a police lockdown. This would be the third time. He scrubbed his hands with locally available disinfectant, sterilized stolen surgical instruments over flame, and thanked whatever cosmic force had led him to study field medicine during his training years. The woman, barely conscious, fever-ravaged, wouldn't survive the night without intervention. The Goa'uld would classify her death as divine will, the cost of mortality for those unworthy of God's favor. Bruce classified it as a problem with a solution. 2 hours later, the appendix removed and the incisions sutured with thread he'd sterilized personally, he stepped back from the improvised surgical table. The woman's fever would break in hours. The infection would clear in days. She'd survive and recover fully, no divine intervention required. Around the medical wing, 12 other patients had received treatment, antibiotics, surgical repairs, simple medical procedures that Earth's emergency rooms performed thousands of times daily. Nothing miraculous. Nothing that required advanced technology or divine power. Just human knowledge applied with precision and care. "We must leave," Teal'c said from the doorway. "Dawn approaches, and the Goa'uld priests will arrive to collect the dead. Instead they'll find the living," Bruce said, cleaning his hands one final time. "Let's see how they explain that to their god." They disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness, ghosts who'd committed the revolutionary act of basic healthcare. Behind them, patients would wake to find their symptoms relieved, their pain diminished, their lives extended, not through divine mercy but through simple medical science. The temple priests would have no explanation. The Goa'uld would investigate. The faithful would whisper among themselves about miracles that came without gods, about healing that required no ribbon device, about the possibility that perhaps divine intervention wasn't necessary after all. And across 3 other worlds, simultaneous operations were concluding, modified broadcasts showing Goa'uld weakness, sabotaged ceremonial vessels demonstrating divine incompetence, and a dozen other small psychological victories that chipped away at millennia of cultivated mythology. 4 worlds. 8 operations. 0 Jaffa casualties. And the beginning of something the Goa'uld had never faced before. Coordinated asymmetric warfare designed not to defeat their armies, but to dismantle their legitimacy one crack at a time. Back at the rebel camp, Bratak received reports from the other cells over the next 2 days. Every operation had succeeded. The Goa'uld were responding with predictable authoritarian escalation, increased security, public interrogations, searches for rebels who'd somehow struck across multiple worlds simultaneously. "They're afraid," Bratak said, satisfaction evident in his weathered features. "For the first time in my century of service, I see the Goa'uld respond with fear rather than contempt." "Fear is the beginning," Bruce said. "But it's not enough. We've demonstrated capability. Now we need to demonstrate inevitability." He looked at the tactical map, seeing not just scattered bluestones but the outline of a network, a movement, a rebellion that could genuinely threaten the Goa'uld's galaxy-spanning dominion. The symbiote dependency is their deepest control mechanism. He continued. "We need to break it. The Takare have the genetic research. What would it take to develop an alternative to symbiote dependency?" Teal'c's expression darkened. "The Takare have attempted this for generations. The tretinoin drug exists but requires ongoing access to Takare laboratories and resources. Without it, Jaffa who abandon their symbiotes sicken and die within days. Then we need to change that equation. Bruce's mind was already working through the problem like a case file, identifying variables and possible solutions. Because as long as Jaffa requires symbiotes to survive, they're bound to the Goa'uld who control symbiote breeding. But before he could pursue that line of investigation further, the camp's perimeter guards sounded an alert. A runner was approaching from the Chapai, moving at speed that suggested urgency rather than routine report. When the runner arrived, gasping for breath and bleeding from a staff weapon graze across his shoulder, his news changed everything. System Lord Ball has taken notice of the rebellion, he reported between ragged breaths. He is sending his first prime to Chulak. A warrior named Zoken, legendary for crushing insurgencies across a dozen worlds. The runner's eyes carry genuine fear. He brings 2 Hatak motherships, 6 companies of elite Jaffa, and authorization from Ball himself to eradicate the rebellion by any means necessary, including orbital bombardment of suspected rebel strongholds. The gathered Jaffa shifted uneasily. Orbital bombardment meant death from the sky, total destruction of everything within blast radius. No defense, no resistance, just annihilation. Bruce felt the temperature in the room drop as the implication settled over the rebellion like a shroud. They'd gotten the Goa'uld's attention. Now they'd have to survive it. The runner's words hung in the air like smoke from a staff weapon discharge. 2 Hatak motherships represented firepower capable of glassing entire continents. 6 companies of elite Jaffa meant 1,200 warriors trained specifically in counterinsurgency operations. And Bale's first prime commanding them meant the system lords were taking the rebellion seriously enough to deploy their best. Bruce had faced extinction-level threats before. Darkseid's invasion, the Anti-Monitor's assault on reality itself, Doomsday's rampage through Metropolis. But those had been battles fought alongside the Justice League, with Superman's strength and Wonder Woman's prowess and Flash's speed. Here, he had staff weapons, limited supplies, and warriors who, despite their courage, were outgunned by orders of magnitude. "How long until Zoken arrives?" Bruce asked. 3 days, perhaps 4, the runner said. He gathers forces from Bale's territories, consolidating power before the strike. Then we have 72 hours to make this rebellion disappear, Bruce said. Teal'c's eyebrow rose. You propose surrender? I propose we stop being targets. Bruce moved to the tactical map, his mind already racing through possibilities. Zoken is expecting concentrated rebel positions he can bombard from orbit. Established camps, supply caches, command structures. Everything we've built here. He gestured to the ancient ruins around them. We give him empty desert and scattered stones. Disperse the cells? Bratak said slowly. Abandon established positions, scatter into populations where orbital strikes would kill thousands of loyalists alongside dozens of rebels. Exactly. The Goa'uld rule through fear, but they can't maintain that rule if they're slaughtering their own slave populations indiscriminately. Bruce began marking positions on the map. We dissolve the visible rebellion. Cells break into pairs, go deep undercover in garrison towns, temple complexes, mining operations. Anywhere with enough civilian presence that orbital bombardment becomes politically costly. Ball cares nothing for Jaffa lives. Shana UC protested. He has destroyed worlds for lesser offenses. Ball cares about his power base. Bruce corrected. System lords compete through military strength and controlled populations. Every world he glasses is one he can't tax, can't mine for Nequata, can't conscript warriors from. The other system lords would see it as weakness, wasted resources. He traced lines between positions. We make the cost of crushing the rebellion higher than the cost of tolerating it. Force Ball to choose between expensive counterinsurgency or accepting low-level resistance. You ask us to hide, one rebel said, disgust evident in his voice. To abandon honor and slink like cowards among those who still serve false gods. Bruce turned to face the warrior. I'm asking you to survive. Honor means nothing if you're atomized from orbit. Dead rebels don't free anyone. His voice carried the weight of 20 years fighting a war he couldn't win through direct confrontation. The Joker wants me to face him in open combat because he knows I'd lose. Ra's al Ghul wants me to fight his league head-on because my principles would get me killed. I win by refusing to fight their fight. By changing the battlefield to favor my strengths. The detective speaks wisdom, Bratak said quietly. I have fought the Goa'uld for a century. I have seen rebellions crushed through overwhelming force, entire populations executed as examples. The only uprisings that survive are those the Goa'uld cannot locate or cannot destroy without unacceptable cost. He looked around at the assembled rebels. We have demonstrated our capability. Now we must demonstrate our resilience. A rebellion that cannot be found cannot be crushed. Over the next 48 hours, the rebel camp dissolved like smoke in wind. Warriors took only what they could carry, destroyed what they couldn't, and scattered to predetermined positions across Chulak and 3 neighboring worlds. Bratak and TLC coordinated the dispersal personally, using their decades of experience to position cells where they'd be most useful and least vulnerable. Bruce worked with each departing cell, teaching them the fundamentals of deep cover operations. How to blend into loyal Jaffa populations. How to communicate through dead drops and coded messages. How to identify potential sympathizers without exposing themselves. How to maintain operational security when living among the enemy. It was the same tradecraft he'd used infiltrating organized crime, the same methodology he'd employed going undercover in Gotham's underworld. The scale was different, but the principles remained constant. Become invisible, gather intelligence, strike only when the cost-benefit analysis favored action, and never give the enemy a target they could hit with overwhelming force. What of you? TLC asked on the final night before Zokan's projected arrival. You are Tauri, stranger to our worlds. You cannot blend into Jaffa populations. No, but I can do something the Goa'uld won't expect, Bruce said. He'd spent the last 2 days studying Goa'uld intelligence procedures, interrogation techniques, and security protocols from captured documents and rebel testimony. Zokan will arrive expecting to find rebel bases. When he finds nothing, he'll search for intelligence about rebel movements. He'll interrogate suspected sympathizers, torture prisoners, tear apart garrison records looking for patterns. You cannot withstand Goa'uld interrogation, Bratak said bluntly. The ribbon device breaks the strongest minds. You would reveal everything, Tauri involvement, SGC operations, the gate's location on Earth. I'm not trying to kill him. I'm trying to make him look incompetent. Bruce smiled grimly. Every authoritarian enforcer has the same vulnerability. They serve at the pleasure of their superior. If Zokan fails to crush this rebellion, if he returns to Baal empty-handed after deploying significant resources, he looks weak. And the Goa'uld don't tolerate weakness in their servants. You would sabotage his operations, TLC said, understanding dawning. Make his search fruitless, his interrogations yield false intelligence, his displays of power seem desperate rather than overwhelming. I'd make him waste weeks chasing ghosts while his system lord questions why this is taking so long, Bruce confirmed. The goal isn't military victory. It's making occupation more expensive than Baal is willing to pay. He closed the notebook. But I need to move independently. The rebellion needs to stay scattered and hidden while I draw Zokan's attention. Bratak studied him for a long moment. You would make yourself target to protect the rebellion. This is either great courage or great foolishness, detective. In Gotham we call it Tuesday, Bruce said. I've been drawing fire from people trying to kill me since I put on the cowl. At least the Goa'uld don't use clown-themed death traps. When Zokan's Hatak motherships arrived in Chulak's orbit 3 days later, their sensors found exactly what Bruce had intended: abandoned rebel camps, scattered equipment, and no concentrated targets worth orbital bombardment. The first prime deployed ground forces expecting to flush out hiding rebels. Instead, he found a ghost rebellion that struck when he wasn't looking and vanished before he could respond. Supply convoys intercepted by attackers who disappeared into civilian populations. communications sabotaged with techniques that suggested inside information. Garrison commanders reporting sightings of a strange warrior, either Jaffa nor Goa'uld, who appeared from shadows and vanished like smoke. And in the darkness between strikes, Bruce Wayne did what he'd done for 20 years in Gotham. He became the thing his enemies feared most. Not a warrior they could fight, but a shadow they couldn't catch, a legend that grew with every failure to capture him, a symbol that proved the Goa'uld's vaunted power couldn't stop one determined human with knowledge, skill, and absolute refusal to quit. The Jaffa Rebellion had lost its visible camps and concentrated forces. But it had gained something far more valuable. It had learned to fight the way Bruce had always fought. In the shadows. Through fear and symbol. By making the enemy's strength irrelevant, and their weaknesses catastrophic. Zokin would learn what Gotham's criminals already knew. Sometimes the most dangerous opponent isn't the one with the biggest weapons. It's the one you can't find until it's too late. Zokin's interrogation chambers were located in a commandeered Jaffa barracks on Chulak's eastern continent. Bruce watched from a ridge 200 meters away as prisoners were brought in, suspected rebel sympathizers, garrison commanders who'd failed to report suspicious activity, even civilians who'd been in the wrong place when Zokin's patrols swept through settlements. The first prime was escalating. Frustrated by weeks of chasing shadows and finding nothing, he'd resorted to the Goa'uld's favorite tactic: terror through public brutality. It was exactly what Bruce had predicted. And exactly what he'd planned for. 32 prisoners inside. TLC reported from his position 3 meters to Bruce's left. The Jaffa warrior had refused to remain scattered with the other cells, insisting that Bruce needed someone who understood Goa'uld military operations. 8 guards, 2 Jaffa armed with ribbon devices, and Zokin himself conducting interrogations personally. He's losing patience, Bruce observed, studying the facility through scavenged optical equipment. 2 high-tech motherships in orbit, 6 companies of elite warriors, and after 3 weeks he has nothing to show Ball except empty camps and ghost stories about a shadow warrior. His reputation is taking damage. The stories spread among the Jaffa, TLC said with grim satisfaction. Even loyal warriors whisper about the one who strikes from darkness, who cannot be killed or captured, who makes Zokin's elite forces look like children chasing phantoms. Bruce had cultivated those stories carefully. Every supply convoy he'd intercepted, he'd left survivors specifically to report what they'd seen, or more importantly, what they hadn't seen until it was too late. Every sabotage operation included elements designed to seem impossible. Sealed rooms with equipment destroyed from inside, guards who swore no one had passed their positions, security systems that showed no intrusions yet somehow rebels knew patrol schedules perfectly. He'd used similar tactics in Gotham. Criminals feared Batman not just because he could fight, but because he seemed supernatural. Everywhere and nowhere. Knowing things he shouldn't know. Appearing from impossible angles. The Jaffa were beginning to fear him the same way. "Those prisoners die if we don't extract them tonight," Bruce said, watching guards drag another victim inside. "Zokin's using ribbon device torture to break them, force confessions about rebel locations that don't exist. When they can't provide information they don't have, he'll execute them publicly to demonstrate his power. We cannot assault a fortified position defended by elite Jaffa," TLC said. "Even with surprise, we would be overwhelmed. Then we don't assault it. We make Zokin abandon it voluntarily." Bruce pulled a small device from his utility belt, Goa'uld communications equipment he'd modified over the past week. His high-tech motherships maintain constant communication with ground forces. Command structure runs through centralized tactical network, all encrypted using standard Goa'uld military protocols, which cannot be broken without Goa'uld encryption keys, TLC said. Or without someone who's spent 3 weeks intercepting their communications and analyzing their encryption patterns. Bruce had learned cryptography from some of the world's best codebreakers during his training years. Goa'uld encryption was sophisticated, but it followed logical mathematical principles. Every code could be broken given enough time and processing power. "I can't decrypt everything," but I can inject false signals that look authentic enough to pass initial verification. You would send false orders to Zokan, TLC said, understanding immediately. I'd send urgent redeployment commands that appear to come from his Hotak flagship, signed with stolen authentication codes, reporting a major rebel attack on an Aquata mining operation 200 kilometers north. Bruce adjusted the device's settings. Zokan will verify the order, discover the mining operation actually is experiencing equipment failures that could look like sabotage if you're paranoid enough, and redeploy his forces to defend a strategic asset. Leaving the interrogation center undermanned. TLC finished. But Zokan is not fool. He will leave sufficient garrison to hold prisoners. Which is where Phase 2 begins. Bruce gestured toward the facility. What happens to Goa'uld installations when their primary power systems fail catastrophically? Emergency protocols initiate. Backup generators activate. If backups fail, the facility enters lockdown until power is restored. TLC's eyes narrowed. You sabotaged their power systems. 2 days ago, while Zokan's forces were investigating a false rebel sighting I arranged on the western continent. I placed a charge on the primary generator's coupling system, set to detonate on remote trigger. Bruce showed him the detonator. When Zokan redeploys north and I blow the generator, the facility goes dark. Guards panic, prisoners scatter in confusion, and in the chaos, we extract whoever we can before backup power restores lighting. This requires precise timing. TLC observed. Everything I do requires precise timing. That's why I'm still alive. Bruce checked his equipment one final time. Bratak is positioning a rescue team 300 meters east. When the power fails, they move in, grab prisoners, extract to the Chapai. We'll have maybe 4 minutes before guards restore order. And you? I'll be inside making sure Zokan knows exactly who embarrassed him tonight. The operation unfolded with the precision Bruce had spent weeks cultivating. The false communication went out at dusk, authenticated codes triggering Zokan's paranoia about losing a strategic Naquata mine. The first prime deployed 4 companies north, leaving skeleton crew at the interrogation center, still significant force, but manageable in chaos. Bruce infiltrated the facility the way he'd infiltrated 100 secure locations in Gotham. Through vulnerability in their ventilation systems, moving through maintenance corridors too small for armored Jaffa to navigate easily, timing his movement to guard rotations he'd memorized from days of observation. He reached the main holding area where 32 prisoners sat chained to walls, most bearing signs of ribbon device torture. Their eyes tracked him as he emerged from shadows. First with fear, then with recognition as they registered the strange Tauri warrior whose legend had spread through Jaffa populations over the past weeks. I'm getting you out, Bruce said quietly in the Goa'uld language he'd learned from TLC. When the lights fail, stay low and follow the warriors who come for you. The Shadow Walker, one prisoner whispered. You are real. Bruce had no time to address mythology. He triggered the detonator. The primary generator exploded with enough force to shake the facility's foundations. Emergency lighting flickered on, then failed as the backup systems Bruce had sabotaged struggled to compensate. In the sudden darkness broken only by scattered emergency lights, chaos erupted exactly as predicted. Jaffa guards shouted orders, trying to maintain control. Prisoners rattled chains, hope kindling in the dark. And Bruce moved through the confusion like water through cracks, picking locks with tools he'd fashioned from scavenged materials, directing freed prisoners toward exits where Bratak's rescue team waited. He'd extracted 23 of 32 when Zokan's voice boomed through the facility's emergency communications system. Seal all exits. The Shadow Warrior is here. 50,000 currency to the Jaffa who captures him alive. So much for subtle extraction. Bruce abandoned stealth for speed, using smoke pellets from his belt to cover the remaining prisoners' escape. Staff weapon blasts lit the smoke-filled corridors as guards fired blindly, hitting walls and each other more often than targets. He was guiding the last group toward the exit when a massive Jaffa warrior blocked the corridor. Zokan himself, 7 feet tall and armored in ceremonial first prime gear that looked more impressive than practical. The Goa'uld's eyes glowed golden with his symbiote's presence. "Finally," Zokan said, staff weapon leveled. "The phantom who has made me look foolish before Lord Ball. You die here, and this pathetic rebellion dies with you." Bruce had faced bigger opponents. Killer Croc, Bane, even Superman when mind-controlled. Size and strength mattered less than tactics and understanding your opponent's psychology. Your rebellion was dead the day you started chasing ghosts instead of crushing real targets, Bruce said, already calculating angles. Ball sent his first prime to eliminate resistance. Instead, you've spent 3 weeks being humiliated by scattered cells and one Tauri who knows how to exploit paranoid authoritarians. Zokan's face contorted with rage, exactly the reaction Bruce wanted. Angry opponents made mistakes. The first prime fired. Bruce dove left, rolled, through a flashbang he'd constructed from seized equipment. In the blazing light and thunderous sound, he closed distance, drove an elbow strike into Zokan's knee, armored, but joints were always vulnerable, and used the bigger warrior's forward momentum to throw him into the wall with a judo technique Ra's al Ghul had beaten into him years ago. Zokan crashed into stone hard enough to crack his ornate helmet. Bruce didn't wait for recovery, just ran for the exit where the last prisoners were disappearing into darkness. Behind him, Zokan's enraged roar echoed through the facility. "Find him! Tear this planet apart if necessary! I want his head!" Which was fine. The angrier Zokan became, the more resources he'd waste on revenge instead of strategic objectives. The more he'd look like a first prime losing control, obsessed with personal vendetta over mission completion. Bruce reached the extraction point where TLC waited with the Chappai active, event horizon shimmering. Freed prisoners were already stepping through to safety at a Takare-controlled world Bratak had arranged. "Zokan will report this failure to Ball," TLC said as they prepared to gate out. "The System Lord will question his first prime's competence." "Good," Bruce said, stepping toward the wormhole. "Let them fight among themselves about who's to blame for not crushing a rebellion they can't even find. Every hour they waste on internal politics is an hour the real rebellion uses to organize, recruit, and prepare." They stepped through together, the event horizon swallowing them and depositing them light years away in less than a heartbeat. Behind them on Chulak, Zokan surveyed the wreckage of his interrogation center. Prisoners freed, power systems destroyed, his elite guards unconscious or dead, and his reputation with Lord Ball hanging by a thread. The Shadow Rebellion had struck again, and the legend grew stronger with every failure to stop it. The Takare base existed in tunnels grown from living crystal deep beneath a desert world's surface. Bruce sat in a chamber that pulsed with soft bioluminescence, facing 3 Takare operatives whose eyes alternated between human brown and symbiote-enhanced glow as host and symbiote traded control of speech. "Your actions have drawn significant Goa'uld attention," the lead Takare, Garshaw of Belodi, said, her voice carrying the doubled resonance that marked symbiote speech. "System Lord Ball has recalled Zokan in disgrace and assigned 2 additional underlords to Chulak. The rebellion has become priority threat." "Which means it's working," Bruce said. "The Goa'uld are diverting resources from expansion and consolidation to internal security. Every hatak they assign to hunting rebels is one they can't use conquering new territory or fighting rival system lords. It also means escalation," another Takare warned. "The Goa'uld do not accept prolonged resistance. They will eventually deploy overwhelming force or make examples so horrific that the rebellion collapses from terror." Bruce had considered this scenario. Authoritarian regimes followed predictable patterns when faced with insurgency. Initial dismissal, escalating response, eventual overreaction that either crushed resistance or created more rebels than it eliminated. The key was pushing them toward overreaction while minimizing civilian casualties. "That's why we need the next phase operational before they can organize a comprehensive response," Bruce said. "The rebellion needs to transition from scattered cells conducting opportunistic strikes to a coordinated network capable of sustained operations. Which brings me to why I requested this meeting. He pulled out documents he'd compiled over the past month. Intelligence on Goa'uld symbiote breeding facilities, Tredenin production capabilities, and Jaffa physiological dependencies. The symbiote requirement is the Goa'uld's ultimate control mechanism. Every Jaffa depends on a larval symbiote to survive past childhood. The Goa'uld control symbiote breeding, which means they control Jaffa survival. Break that dependency, and you break their power base. The Takari have provided Tredenin to free Jaffa willing to accept it, Garshaw said. But production is limited, and distribution impossible across Goa'uld-controlled territories without exposing our operatives. So we don't distribute it. We teach the Jaffa to produce it themselves. Bruce spread his documents across the crystal table. Tredenin isn't magic, it's synthetic symbiote protein compounds that replace the immune system functions a symbiote normally provides. The formula exists. The production process is documented in your records. What's missing is distributed manufacturing capability. You propose teaching enslaved Jaffa to synthesize Tredenin in secret facilities across Goa'uld territories. A Takari named Selmak said, his host Jacob Carter's military background evident in his tactical assessment. The Goa'uld would detect such operations immediately. They monitor all scientific research, all chemical production, specifically to prevent such developments. They monitor large-scale operations, Bruce corrected. Centralized laboratories, official research facilities. They're not looking for small-scale production in scattered locations using equipment that appears to serve legitimate purposes. He pulled out schematics he'd drawn. Tredenin synthesis requires specific compounds and processing equipment, but the individual components can be disguised as standard medical supplies, agricultural processing tools, or mining equipment. Distributed across dozens of cells in quantities too small to trigger Goa'uld monitoring systems. Jacob Carter's eyes widened slightly, the human host asserting control to speak directly. You're describing a covert manufacturing network. Cell-based production where no single facility creates enough Tredenin to be detectable, but collectively they supply the rebellion's needs. Exactly. Same principle as underground weapons manufacturing during Earth's resistance movements. The Nazis couldn't stop it because there was no centralized target to destroy. Bruce met Jacob's gaze. I've worked with Lucius Fox at Wayne Enterprises on distributed supply chains designed to resist hostile takeovers. The methodology transfers to insurgent pharmaceutical production. It would take months to establish, Garshaw said. Training Jaffa in chemical synthesis, securing necessary materials, building the production network while avoiding Goa'uld detection. Which is why we start now, while the Goa'uld are still scrambling to respond to the Shadow campaign. Bruce leaned forward. Every week we delay is another week the rebellion remains dependent on symbiotes the Goa'uld control. We need Jaffa who can survive without symbiotes, who can't be controlled through threatening larval supply. That's the strategic objective that makes this rebellion sustainable long-term. The Takari Council conferred silently, their symbiotes communicating through means Bruce didn't fully understand but respected as efficient. Finally, Garshaw nodded. We will provide initial Tredenin samples, chemical formulas, and technical training. But the Takari cannot directly involve ourselves further. Our operations against the Goa'uld require maintaining deep cover among System Lord courts. Open support for the Jaffa Rebellion would expose our agents to execution. I'm not asking for troops or open alliance, Bruce said. Just knowledge transfer and initial resources. The rebellion will handle distribution and production security. Over the next 6 weeks, Bruce coordinated what he privately called the largest covert pharmaceutical operation in galactic history. Takari trainers taught selected Jaffa rebels basic chemistry and synthesis procedures. Bratak identified trustworthy cell leaders capable of maintaining operational security. TLC used his network of former First Prime contacts to identify Jaffa questioning their symbiote dependency. Bruce himself designed the distribution network using everything he'd learned from Gotham's organized crime structures. Ironically, mob distribution systems proved excellent templates for insurgent logistics. Dead drops at gate addresses the Goa'uld rarely monitored. Coded messages hidden in religious texts transported between temple complexes. Equipment disguised as agricultural tools or medical supplies moving through legitimate supply chains. The first synthesis cell went operational on a mining world where Jaffa labor forces extracted naquata under brutal conditions. The cell leader, a former mining supervisor named Kresh, converted a corner of his equipment maintenance facility into a synthesis lab, producing enough tretinin weekly to supply 12 Jaffa. Within a month, 7 cells were operational across 4 worlds. Production remained small-scale, barely noticeable against the background noise of normal Goa'uld industrial activity. But it proved the concept worked. The first Jaffa to voluntarily surrender their symbiote and transition to tretinin was a warrior named Toman who'd served the system Lord U for 30 years. Bruce watched as Toman underwent the procedure, symbiote removed, tretinin administered, the Jaffa's immune system supported through the traumatic transition. "How do you feel?" Tilsi asked when Toman regained consciousness. "Free," Toman whispered, touching the empty pouch in his abdomen where a symbiote had lived for 3 decades. "For the first time since childhood, free." Words spread through rebel networks carefully, cautiously. The Goa'uld didn't notice immediately. One Jaffa dying of supposed symbiote rejection wasn't unusual. But when Toman survived, weeks passed when he should have died without a symbiote. When he remained strong and healthy on tretinin alone, other Jaffa began asking questions. The rebellion's strategic transformation had begun. No longer just warriors striking from shadows, they were becoming a genuine alternative to Goa'uld rule. Jaffa could see a future without symbiote dependency, without prostrating themselves before false gods for the privilege of survival. But transformation drew attention from those who most feared change. The warning came through a Takare intelligence channel. Ball had learned of unusual chemical synthesis activity on rebellion-affiliated worlds. He'd assigned his chief scientist, a Goa'uld named Nerdy who specialized in genetic experimentation, to investigate whether rebels had developed biological weapons. "Nerdy will discover the tretinin production eventually," Jacob Carter said through the Takare communication crystals. "When she does, Ball will recognize it as existential threat to Goa'uld control over Jaffa populations. He'll deploy whatever force necessary to destroy the synthesis network and execute everyone involved." Bruce studied the intelligence reports in the rebel command center they'd re-established on a different world. Nerdy was dangerous. The files said she'd experimented on human populations trying to create advanced hosts, had committed atrocities across dozens of worlds. She wouldn't just destroy the synthesis cells. She'd make examples that would terrorize the entire rebellion. "Then we need to make sure she's too busy to investigate synthesis operations," Bruce said, mind already working through possibilities. "Nerdy's a scientist first, megalomaniac second. What's her greatest weakness?" "Pride in her genetic research," Tilsi said. "She believes herself the foremost expert in human Goa'uld compatibility, superior even to the system lords who command her." "Pride," Bruce repeated. In Gotham, pride had brought down more criminals than any amount of detective work. The Riddler's compulsion to prove his intellectual superiority. Two-Face's need to demonstrate his philosophy. Even Ra's al Ghul's certainty that his vision justified any atrocity. Then we give her research she can't resist investigating. Something that appears to threaten her theories about genetic superiority. He began sketching plans that would require careful coordination, significant risk, and absolutely perfect timing. But that was how every good plan started. With impossible odds and the determination to beat them anyway. The Goa'uld thought themselves untouchable, their control absolute, their dominion eternal. They were about to learn what happened when someone who'd spent 20 years toppling untouchable crime empires decided their dominion had lasted long enough. The trap required something Bruce had spent his entire career avoiding, making himself visible. Not as shadow or legend, but as a verifiable target that Nerdy couldn't resist capturing for her genetic experiments. "This is suicide," Batak said flatly when Bruce explained the plan. "Nerdy has tortured and dissected thousands of humans in her research. You would deliver yourself to her laboratories voluntarily? I'd deliver bait she'll prioritize over investigating Tredenin production, Bruce corrected. They stood in a rebel safe house on a world called Vaganbray, studying intelligence gathered on Nerdy's current operations. She's searching for the Hoktor, the advanced human capable of serving as the perfect Goa'uld host. According to Takari reports, she's been experimenting on populations trying to engineer one artificially. You are Tauri, from the world that produced Colonel O'Neill and the warriors who have defeated multiple system lords, TLC said, understanding dawning. If Nerdy learns a Tauri is operating among the Jaffa Rebellion, leading operations that have embarrassed Baal himself, she'll want me on her dissection table more than she wants to investigate chemical anomalies in mining facilities. Bruce pulled out a data crystal containing falsified intelligence. We leak information through channels we know Baal's spies monitor. Reports of a Tauri strategist coordinating rebel operations, possessing advanced knowledge of tactics and technology. Make it look like accidental intelligence failure, captured rebel breaking under interrogation, corrupted communication intercept, anything that seems authentic. And when Nerdy captures you? Bratak's scarred face showed rare concern. The Goa'uld will extract everything you know through ribbon device torture, sarcophagus interrogation, or simply dissection while you remain conscious. You cannot withstand such methods. I've been trained in resistance to interrogation by people who make the Goa'uld look amateur. Bruce had endured everything from KGB techniques to League of Assassins methods during his training years. He'd been tortured by villains, drugged by fear toxin, and psychologically dissected by psychiatrists trying to understand Batman. And I won't be in Nerdy's custody long enough for deep interrogation. Just long enough to keep her distracted while you complete the real objective. He spread out schematics of Nerdy's mobile research facility, a modified Teltac cargo ship she used to move between experimental sites. While she's focused on studying me, a strike team infiltrates her ship's data core and steals her complete research archives. Every genetic experiment, every test subject record, every piece of data she's compiled over centuries. We deliver it to the Takare, who can use it to identify her test subjects and potential rescue targets. And you escape how? TLC asked. The same way I've escaped from every death trap I've ever been locked in. Bruce's expression was grim. Carefully. The leaked intelligence worked exactly as predicted. Within 3 days, Nerdy diverted from investigating synthesis facilities to hunting reports of a Tauri operating on Vaganbray. She deployed teams to capture him alive, her scientific curiosity overwhelming tactical caution. Bruce let himself be found in a market district, surrounded by Jaffa loyal to Baal who'd been tracking falsified evidence he deliberately left. The fight was brief and calculated. He disabled 6 warriors using techniques that demonstrated advanced hand-to-hand training, then allowed himself to be stunned by a Zat blast from a 7th attacker positioned precisely where he'd expected. He woke in restraints aboard Nerdy's Teltac, the Goa'uld's golden eyes studying him with predatory fascination. A Tauri far from Earth, organizing primitive Jaffa against their gods, Nerdy said, her voice carrying that characteristic doubled resonance. How did you arrive in this region? What makes you believe you can challenge the system lords? Bruce said nothing, conserving energy and studying his surroundings. Medical equipment designed for vivisection. Scanning devices analyzing his biology. Security systems protecting the ship's critical areas. And somewhere behind those bulkheads, the data core containing centuries of Nerdy's research. You possess unusual neural patterns, Nerdy continued, examining a display showing his brain activity. Advanced problem-solving capabilities, enhanced tactical processing, psychological conditioning suggesting extensive combat and strategic training. You would make a fascinating subject for genetic analysis. She moved closer, activating a ribbon device on her hand, the Karakesh torture weapon. I could extract your knowledge through pain. Force you to reveal Tauri military capabilities, gate addresses, strategic weaknesses. But such crude methods damage the specimen. Her smile was predatory. Instead, I will study you systematically. Map every aspect of your biology and psychology. And when I understand what makes Tauri superior to other humans, I will replicate it. The ribbon device pressed against Bruce's forehead. Pain exploded through his nervous system, white-hot agony designed to break resistance through sheer overwhelming sensation. He'd endured Joker's torture, Bane's brutality, even Darkseid's Omega beams and alternate timelines. But the Karakesh operated on a different principle, pure neural stimulation that bypassed physical damage to create suffering without relief. He lasted 43 seconds before unconsciousness claimed him. Not surrender, just biology reaching its limits. When awareness returned, he was in a medical bay, restrained on an examination table while scanners hummed overhead. Nerdy worked at a console, documenting findings with scientific precision. Remarkable resilience, she noted. Neurological tolerance exceeds baseline human parameters by 17%. Muscular density suggests extensive physical conditioning. Scarring patterns indicate significant combat history and multiple traumatic injuries. She approached the table. You have survived encounters that would kill ordinary humans. What makes you exceptional? Training, Bruce said hoarsely. Determination. And knowing that people like you always make the same mistake. What mistake? Underestimating your test subjects. The restraints he'd been working on since regaining consciousness released simultaneously, not broken, but unlocked using a technique he'd learned from a Tibetan escape artist. He rolled off the table as Nerdy triggered an alarm, staff weapons charging throughout the ship. But Bruce had counted guard rotations during his interrogation, memorized patrol patterns from their footsteps and voices. He moved through the Teltac like smoke, using ventilation shafts and maintenance corridors while Jaffa warriors searched predictable locations. He reached the data core 3 minutes before the strike team was scheduled to breach from outside. The security systems were sophisticated, but he'd spent a month studying captured Goa'uld technology. Every system had vulnerabilities. He just had to find them fast enough. The data core access required biometric authentication, Goa'uld retinal scan and Aquata signature. Bruce pulled a small device from a hidden pocket in his boot, a recording of Nerdy's biometric data he'd captured during his interrogation using equipment so small she'd never detected it. The system accepted the false credentials. Files began downloading to a portable storage crystal at speeds that seemed glacial, while alarms blared throughout the ship. 73% complete when Nerdy found him. Clever, she said, staff weapon leveled. But futile. You cannot escape this vessel alive. My research will continue, with or without your cooperation. Your research is over, Bruce said. 81%. The data you've been collecting, every test subject, every genetic experiment, is about to become Takare intelligence. They'll use it to find your victims, rescue who they can, expose your atrocities across the galaxy. Then I will simply eliminate you and continue with fresh subjects. Her finger moved toward the trigger. The Teltax hull exploded inward as TLCS strike team breached simultaneously from 3 entry points. Staff weapon fire filled the corridor. In the chaos, Bruce completed the download, 97%, 99, 100, and pocketed the crystal. Move! TLC shouted, providing covering fire. They fought through Nerdy's guards to the Teltax ring transporter, beaming down to Vagonbray's surface as the Goa'uld screamed orders for pursuit. The rebel team scattered into prepared escape routes, each member carrying pieces of Bruce's intel analysis and Tredenin synthesis data. Nerdy would hunt them. Ball would deploy additional forces. The Goa'uld would escalate again. But the rebellion now possessed something invaluable. Complete records of Nerdy's genetic experiments, identifying hundreds of potential allies who'd survived her atrocities and would fight to destroy her. And more importantly, Nerdy was now focused on recovering her stolen data rather than investigating Tredenin production. You took considerable risk, Bratak said when they regrouped at a safe house. Goa'uld captivity could have ended very differently. Calculated risk, Bruce corrected, though his body still ached from ribbon device torture. And it bought us time. The synthesis network is operational across 8 worlds now. 300 Jaffa transitioning to Tredenin independence. Every day we delay Goa'uld response is another day the rebellion becomes self-sustaining. He looked at the data crystal containing Nerdy's research. And now we have intelligence that makes us dangerous enough that the system lords can't ignore us anymore. You wanted their attention, TLC observed. I wanted them committed, Bruce said. When the Goa'uld fully commit to crushing the rebellion, when they deploy overwhelming force to a decisive battle, that's when we'll discover if this rebellion can actually win, or if it just burns bright before burning out. The twin suns of Vaganbray set beyond the horizon, and somewhere across the galaxy, system lords gathered to discuss the Jaffa Rebellion that refused to die. The final confrontation was approaching, and Bruce Wayne intended to be ready. The summit happened at Dakara, the sacred Jaffa world where the Goa'uld had maintained their symbiote breeding grounds for millennia. Intelligence from the Takare reported that 3 system lords, Baal, Yu, and a resurgent underlord claiming dominion, had agreed to coordinate a joint strike against the rebellion. 6 Hotak motherships, 15 companies of elite Jaffa, and enough firepower to glass every world where rebel activity had been reported. It was exactly the overreaction Bruce had been engineering for 3 months. They're committing significant resources, Jacob Carter said through the Takare communication crystal. This represents a substantial portion of their available military strength. If they succeed in crushing the rebellion, they'll execute every Jaffa suspected of sympathy and tighten control across their territories. And if they fail? Bruce asked. Then they look weak before the other system lords. Vulnerable. It could trigger challenges to their authority, shifts in power dynamics across the entire Goa'uld hierarchy. Bruce studied the tactical display TLC had assembled. Every rebel cell position, every Tredenin synthesis facility, every Jaffa who declared for freedom over the past months. 2,000 active fighters across 12 worlds. 500 more transitioning from symbiote dependency to Tredenin independence. Networks of sympathizers and garrison forces who hadn't openly rebelled but provided intelligence and passive resistance. Against the combined might of 3 system lords, it wasn't nearly enough. Not for conventional warfare. But Bruce had never fought conventional wars. We're not defending static positions, he said, addressing the assembled rebel commanders through a network of communication crystals the Takare had provided. The Goa'uld expect us to fortify the worlds where we've established presence, dig in and fight for territory. That's how insurgencies fail. They start holding ground and become targets for overwhelming force. Then what do you propose? Shauna Yusi asked from her position on Sahal. We cannot run forever. We don't run. We fight on our terms, not theirs. Bruce marked positions on the tactical display. The system lords are bringing 6 Hotak motherships to Dakara for final coordination before their offensive. That represents extraordinary concentration of leadership, firepower, and strategic assets in one location. Bratak's scarred face showed understanding. You propose striking the summit itself. I propose making them understand that gathering their strength in one place creates vulnerability, not security. Bruce pulled up schematics of Dakara's defenses. We can't destroy 6 Hotaks or kill 3 system lords with the forces we have. But we can do something that damages them more than military defeat. What damages the Goa'uld more than destroying their fleets? A rebel commander asked skeptically. Humiliating them publicly. Bruce's expression was grim. The Goa'uld maintain power through mythology. Their gods, untouchable, supreme. What happens when rebellious Jaffa strike at the heart of their sacred world during a summit of system lords, broadcast the attack across Goa'uld territories, and escape before their combined forces can respond? TLC's eyebrow rose. You would make this a propaganda victory rather than military engagement. I'd make it both. We hit the symbiote breeding grounds at Dakara, sabotage the facilities that produce the larvae every Jaffa needs to survive. Broadcast footage of rebels destroying the source of Goa'uld control over Jaffa populations. Then we offer every Jaffa watching an alternative: join the rebellion and receive Tredenin, or remain enslaved to system lords who can no longer guarantee symbiote supply. The silence that followed carried weight. What Bruce proposed was enormously risky, striking at the most heavily defended Goa'uld installation in the galaxy while system lords and their fleets were present. But the strategic logic was undeniable. The Tredenin network must be operational enough to support mass defections, Bratak said carefully. If we promise symbiote independence to thousands of Jaffa and cannot deliver, we lose all credibility. 14 synthesis facilities are operational across 9 worlds, Bruce confirmed. Production capacity for approximately 800 Jaffa monthly, scaling up as more facilities come online. Not enough for every Jaffa in the galaxy, but enough to demonstrate viability. To prove this rebellion offers genuine alternative to Goa'uld rule. Over the next week, Bruce coordinated the most complex operation the rebellion had ever attempted. Strike teams positioned at Dakara through hidden routes the Takare provided. Broadcast equipment smuggled into position to transmit across Goa'uld communication networks. Escape routes planned through the gate network to scatter forces if the operation failed. And at the center of it all, Bruce himself would lead the assault on the symbiote breeding grounds while system lords met in orbit above. "You've trained us for 3 months to operate without you," Tilsey said the night before the operation. "Yet you insist on leading the most dangerous element personally." "Because leaders lead from the front," Bruce said. "In Gotham, I never asked anyone to take risks I wouldn't take myself. That doesn't change just because the stakes are galactic instead of urban." He checked his equipment one final time. Improvised armor from Jaffa materials, captured weapons he'd learned to use with brutal efficiency, and the few pieces of Wayne tech that had survived 3 months of constant field operations. "Batman operated alone," TLC observed. "Yet here you command armies." "Batman operated alone because Gotham's criminals feared the symbol more than the man. Here, the rebellion needs to see that humans can stand beside Jaffa as equals, that freedom is achievable through cooperation rather than subservience to false gods." Bruce met his gaze. "And because sometimes the only way to inspire people to believe in impossible things is to accomplish them while they watch." The assault began at dawn when system lords gathered in orbit for their final strategic coordination. Bruce led 50 Jaffa through Dakara's temple complexes to the underground breeding grounds where larvae developed in tanks maintained by enslaved technicians. The guards fell to coordinated strikes, rebels trained in Batman's tactics moving with precision that shocked Goa'uld forces expecting crude insurgent attacks. Within minutes, the breeding facility was under rebel control, its technicians freed, and Bruce stood before the massive tanks containing thousands of symbiote larvae. "Broadcast live," he ordered, and the equipment activated. Across Goa'uld territories, on every world where system lords maintained communication networks, the transmission appeared. Bruce Wayne, the Tauri strategist who had become legend among Jaffa populations, standing beside TLC and Bratak before the symbiote breeding grounds. "I am the shadow warrior your false gods have hunted for 3 months," Bruce said, his voice carrying across the galaxy. "I stand with Jaffa who have learned the truth, that symbiotes do not make you strong, they make you slaves. That the Goa'uld are not gods, they are parasites wearing stolen bodies and wielding stolen technology." He gestured to the breeding tanks. "These larvae represent the chain that binds every Jaffa to Goa'uld masters. Surrender your symbiote, and they let you die. Rebel against their authority, and they withhold the larvae your children need to survive. This is not divine will. This is hostage-taking on a galactic scale." Behind him, rebels began destroying tanks with careful precision, eliminating larvae while technicians dismantled breeding equipment. Not total destruction, that would doom too many Jaffa currently dependent on symbiotes, but enough to demonstrate the vulnerability of Goa'uld control systems. "The rebellion offers alternative," Bruce continued. "Tredenin allows Jaffa to survive without symbiotes, to live free of Goa'uld control. Synthesis facilities operate across 9 worlds, producing enough to support those who choose freedom over slavery." He pulled a data crystal from his armor. "This contains locations of synthesis facilities, production formulas, and instructions for establishing new cells. We transmit it now to every Jaffa who wants to be free. The broadcast ended as alarms blared throughout Dakara. System lords deployed forces from orbit, death gliders screaming toward the temple complex. But Bruce had planned for this: escape routes through underground tunnels, teams scattered to prepositioned gate addresses, extraction time to occur before overwhelming force could respond. They lost 12 rebels in the fighting withdrawal. But they'd accomplished the objective: broadcast evidence that the rebellion could strike the most sacred Goa'uld installation, survive, and offer genuine alternative to symbiote slavery. 2 weeks later, intelligence reports flooded in. Garrison commanders requesting Tredenant supplies. Entire Jaffa units defecting to join the rebellion. System lords executing suspected sympathizers, which only created more rebels. The Goa'uld's coordinated offensive dissolved into chaos as they scrambled to contain mass defections and secure remaining symbiote facilities. The rebellion has become movement, Bratak said, reviewing reports in their new command center on a Takari-allied world. Thousands of Jaffa openly declaring for freedom. The system lords are fractured, fighting among themselves about who's responsible for this catastrophe. Movements require continued momentum, Bruce said. Tredenant production needs to scale faster. Command structures need formalization. And eventually the free Jaffa will need to transition from rebellion to governance. You speak as if you will not be here to guide this transition, TLC observed. Bruce looked at the tactical displays showing a rebellion that had grown far beyond one man's coordination. I've been gone from Earth for 3 months. The Goa'uld no Tauri involvement exists. SGC needs to be informed, and I need to return before my absence creates problems back home. He met TLC's gaze. But more than that, this is your rebellion now. Jaffa fighting for Jaffa freedom. I can advise, but I can't lead it. That has to come from within. You taught us to fight as you fight, Bratak said quietly. In shadows, through fear, by dismantling enemy mythology and building our own. The legend of the Shadow Jaffa will endure long after you return to your world. Legends are useful, Bruce agreed. But sustainable freedom requires institutions, not individuals. Build the free Jaffa nation on principles, not personalities. Make it something that survives leadership transitions and Goa'uld counterattacks. Before returning to Earth, Bruce compiled everything he'd learned into operational manuals the rebellion could use. Tactical doctrine, intelligence tradecraft, psychological operations, distributed manufacturing protocols, and governance frameworks for transitioning from insurgency to legitimate authority. The Takari arranged his transport back to SGC through carefully coordinated gate travel. When Bruce stepped through the event horizon into Stargate Command's gate room 3 months after his unexpected departure, General Hammond stood waiting with SG-1 behind him. "Welcome back, Mr. Wayne," Hammond said dryly. "You've caused quite a stir across several System Lord territories." "Just doing what I do, General," Bruce replied. "Except with a galactic scope instead of a city." Later, in debriefing, he would provide comprehensive intelligence on Goa'uld operations, System Lord vulnerabilities, and the rebellion's strategic position. He would explain methodologies that SGC could adapt for their own operations. And he would recommend continued covert support for the Free Jaffa movement. But in that moment, stepping back into Earth's base of operations after 3 months fighting a galactic insurgency, Bruce Wayne allowed himself brief satisfaction. The Jaffa Rebellion would continue. The Goa'uld would eventually adapt. But the balance of power had shifted, and enslaved populations across the galaxy now knew that freedom was achievable. He'd toppled Gotham's crime families. He'd dismantled the Court of Owls. He'd stood against gods and monsters. And now he'd taught an enslaved species how to fight for their own liberation. Not bad for 3 months of work. 6 months after Bruce Wayne returned to Earth, intelligence reports filtering through SGC and Takari networks painted a picture of fundamental transformation across Goa'uld territories. The Jaffa Rebellion he'd helped ignite had grown beyond anyone's projections. Not through military conquest, but through the systematic dismantling of the mythology and dependency that had sustained Goa'uld rule for millennia. Tredenin production facilities operated openly on 17 worlds now, with dozens more in covert development. Entire Jaffa armies had defected, no longer willing to serve false gods when genuine independence existed as tangible alternative. System lords fought among themselves, blaming each other for failures to contain the uprising, their unity shattered by paranoia Bruce had deliberately cultivated. The free Jaffa nation was becoming reality, not just aspiration. In the SGC briefing room, Bruce reviewed the latest intelligence with General Hammond and SG-1. TLC had returned to Earth briefly to coordinate support between the Rebellion and Stargate Command, his presence a living bridge between two worlds fighting the same enemy through different methodologies. Master Bratak sends his regards, TLC said, his characteristic stoicism touched with something that might have been pride. He wishes me to inform you that the Council of Free Jaffa has formally adopted your tactical doctrines as foundational doctrine. They call it the Shadow Protocols, combat through psychological operations, distributed networks resistant to decapitation strikes, and systematic destruction of authoritarian control structures. Catchy name, Colonel O'Neill said dryly. Though I'm pretty sure Batman's Rogues Gallery would object to the copyright infringement. The methodology is sound regardless of nomenclature. Samantha Carter added, studying the intelligence reports with scientific precision. Distributed manufacturing, cell-based operations, propaganda warfare targeting enemy legitimacy rather than just enemy forces. It's asymmetric warfare theory applied with remarkable discipline across an entire interstellar insurgency. Bruce said nothing, but internally he catalogued the rebellion's evolution with the same analytical framework he applied to Gotham's crime patterns. The Free Jaffa had learned well, perhaps too well. They'd adopted his tactics but also his understanding that symbols mattered more than individual victories, that changing hearts and minds was more strategically valuable than winning battles. The Goa'uld Empire wasn't collapsing overnight. System lords still commanded vast fleets, still controlled thousands of worlds, still posed existential threat to Earth and the broader galaxy. But cracks had appeared in foundations that had seemed unbreakable, and those cracks were spreading. What's your assessment, Mr. Wayne? General Hammond asked. Will the rebellion succeed long-term, or is this a temporary disruption before the Goa'uld reassert control? Bruce considered the question with the same care he brought to predicting Gotham's criminal evolution. The Goa'uld's greatest strength has always been their ability to make occupation seem inevitable, resistance seem futile, and slavery seem natural. We've broken that perception. Shown that Jaffa can survive without symbiotes, fight without divine masters, and govern themselves without parasitic overlords. He met Hammond's gaze. Whether they win militarily is almost secondary. The idea of freedom, once established, is extraordinarily difficult to eliminate. The Goa'uld can destroy rebel armies, but they can't kill the knowledge that independence is possible. Spoken like someone who's been fighting ideological battles as long as tactical ones, Daniel Jackson observed, his archaeological and linguistic expertise making him perhaps the team member who best understood the cultural transformation Bruce had engineered. You didn't just teach them guerrilla warfare. You gave them a competing mythology, the Shadow Jaffa, the Free Nation, the possibility of self-determination. That's what makes this rebellion different from previous uprisings the Goa'uld crushed. Every successful revolution requires both practical capability and inspirational narrative. Bruce agreed. The Jaffa now have both. The rest is up to them. Over the following months, Bruce maintained advisory contact with the rebellion through SGC's coordination with TLC and the Takare networks. He reviewed their tactical plans, suggested refinements to their intelligence operations, and provided analysis of Goa'uld responses. But he deliberately remained distant from operational command, recognizing that the Free Jaffa nation needed to establish its own leadership rather than remaining dependent on outside strategists. In Gotham, he returned to the familiar rhythms of urban vigilantism, rooftop patrols, criminal investigations, the endless war against chaos that had defined his adult life. But the experience of fighting on galactic scale had subtly changed his perspective. The principles remained constant, whether protecting one city or liberating enslaved populations across star systems. Identify vulnerabilities in authoritarian systems, exploit psychological weaknesses, build networks that survive leadership decapitation, and never accept that oppression is inevitable. The Bat family noticed the change, though they couldn't quite articulate it. Batman had always been strategic, analytical, and possibly prepared. But there was new dimension to his operations now. Greater emphasis on psychological operations, more sophisticated network building among Gotham's resistance communities, and refined understanding of how to dismantle authoritarian structures through coordinated asymmetric pressure. "You're different since you came back from that classified mission," Dick Grayson observed during a patrol 6 months after Bruce's return. "More, I don't know. Strategic in ways that feel galactic rather than urban. I spent 3 months fighting an empire that's ruled through fear and false divinity for millennia," Bruce said, watching Gotham streets from their perch above the Narrows. "It provided perspective on scalability of resistance methodologies. The tactics that work against Gotham's crime families work against galactic despots. The principles don't change, just the scope." "And did you win?" Dick asked. "Against the Empire?" Bruce considered the question as distant sirens echoed through Gotham's canyons. "I helped people learn they could win for themselves. Which is the only victory that matters long-term." In the years that followed, the free Jaffa nation would face setbacks and victories, compromises and principles, the messy reality of transforming from rebellion into governance. System lords would adapt, deploying new counterinsurgency tactics and attempting to recreate the dependency structures that had sustained their rule. The war for Jaffa freedom would continue long after Bruce Wayne's direct involvement ended. But on worlds across the galaxy, in temple complexes where enslaved populations once prostrated themselves before false gods, news stories spread. Stories of the Shadow Jaffa who'd walked among rebels, teaching them to fight with cunning rather than just courage. Stories of the Tauri strategist who'd proven that humans could stand as equals to those who claimed divinity. Stories of a rebellion that survived because it fought not just with weapons, but with ideas that no amount of orbital bombardment could destroy. The Goa'uld had ruled for 10,000 years, building their empire on the twin foundations of technological superiority and cultivated mythology. In 3 months, one human with no superpowers beyond intelligence, training, and absolute refusal to accept defeat had taught their slaves how to dismantle both foundations systematically. Batman had walked through the Stargate by accident. He'd returned to Earth having fundamentally altered the balance of power in a galaxy-spanning conflict. And in the Rebellion's operational archives, preserved on data crystals hidden across dozens of worlds, his tactical doctrines would guide free Jaffa operations for generations. Not as rigid dogma, but as foundational principles. Fight in shadows when strength is impossible, attack mythology when military victory is unattainable, and never accept that tyranny is inevitable just because it has endured for millennia.